So now we're going to turn to the final session of the annual meeting, the President's Forum, which will be led and moderated by Victor Dzau, the President of the National Academy of Medicine. And please join me in welcoming Victor and the President's Forum panelists to the stage.
Okay, we've had a long day, lots of great issues discussed. Now, when I saw the last poll data, I said to Francis, we need to convert 3 to a 5. And that's what these leaders are going to help us do. So I'll just summarize very quickly. I think we clearly heard phenomenal progress in science, health, and technology, but lots of challenges. So there's a sense of excitement and also a sense of concern. And you heard the last few panels. Discussion is about science is moving really amazing speed. Are the current models of research, training, and funding, are they keeping up with those changes? There's a whole discussion on the need to have much better communication to the public, much more diversity in the research enterprise and the engagement public, and the issue of trust. So I think the question that was earlier said would be, okay, who is participating in research and who's being, who are the ones doing research? And of course, the whole issue about the need for convergent science and young scientists, giving them stable support. I think you heard all these things, so I'm not going to repeat them. What we have with us are the scientific institution leaders. They're the movers and shakers. So I thought I'll come up and ask them, okay, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to change these things? As the last poll said, well, we're not so confident we can do this. So, okay, I will introduce them individually as I ask them to give their 5-minute thinking. But I think the important issue is that the last group talked about some pathway forward. One is, okay, we need to think about convergence, that science cannot remain in silos, in separate disciplines. More important, it's not just multidisciplinary, it's actually forming teams together to solve a complex problem. The MIT report said that, the National Academy's report has said that. Leslie Voshaus talked about long-term stable support, paying a living wage for researchers and allowing them to build a diverse team. Keith had a whole set of ideas which are really important. He says, well, funding should be focused on societal threats in addition to investigating initiated research, and that we should bring industry in and maybe de-risk them to actually invest more in areas that's needed. And of course, the issue of equity and ultimately societal implication. And then we heard about responsible innovation lab, how to invest. I think the most interesting issues for me, the keynote, because Mariana Mazzucato talked about needing for a new social contract. So it goes back to the discussion of Vannevar Bush, right? Okay, we invest in basic research. Then when, in fact, opportunities come, we hand it over to private sector and the market. What she said is that we need intentionality, that is understanding as we invest $42 billion of NIH research. How do we make sure that the fruits of labor is actually realized back in the public sector, right? So the whole idea of market-driven, development of research versus, in fact, a good social public good. So those are the things I heard. So, okay, with me are some of the, as I said, leaders and shakers of science and institution, from government, from scientific journals, from university, and of course from philanthropy. So I asked them to come and talk to us about their point of view. Let me just therefore begin to ask by Francis Collins, who certainly does not need an introduction. But Francis is the former director of NIH and the former science advisor to President Biden. Each one of you have 5 minutes. Francis, particularly tell us about your perspective on these areas: convergent science, science funding, and of course, where the future of science is going.
Well, thanks, Victor, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a privilege to be on a panel with such distinguished panelists and with Victor as our moderator, and I hope we can maybe chart some new pathways forward here in terms of where our whole enterprise of biomedical research is going. I've listened to the last couple of panels, and I think there were a lot of great points have been brought up, although I'm going to be a little more optimistic than some of the panelists that have preceded me, because let's look at where we are here in terms of things that have gone right. We have, in the course of the last 7 years, seen the support for biomedical research go up by 50%, thanks to strong support from both parties in both houses of the Congress, and strong administrative support right now from President Biden leads us to believe that we are on a path to be able to continue that trajectory. So this is a much more favorable situation than we were experiencing back in 2015. And we ought to be sure to be sending roses and chocolates to all those members of the Congress who made this happen, so that we aren't here wringing our hands about the lowest ever success rates, which is what we were doing during sequester in 2013. So that's a good thing. But, that's just funding. What about the science? Again, I am stunned in a positive way by the remarkable things that are now possible scientifically that people in this room and others not in this room are doing. And they've been touched on by some of the presentations already. Such things as doing single-cell biology combined with the ability to do epigenomics, to do CRISPR, to modify and identify the function of every gene. Put that together with stem cell biology, my own research lab, routinely now taking 400 different stem cell lines, differentiating them into beta cells that make insulin, and figuring out which genes have the most significant effect on what happens as a way of getting an insight into type 2 diabetes. I could not have imagined doing that 5 or 6 years ago. But now, there you are. And all of the things that are happening with the basic science of the brain initiative now giving us that kind of information, the way in which cancer has moved forward, and we're talking about serious tests of multi-cancer early detection to see whether that really does change outcomes, and what's the best way to do that so that we know for sure that that very exciting technology is actually going to improve people's lives, something that the president is very much interested in seeing happen as one of the components of the cancer moonshot. And we heard about all of us, the opportunity to have a cohort of 1 million people who are pre-consented for contact to do follow-on studies and highly diverse and motivated to be part of research. That's an amazing platform that is only just now beginning to emerge in an exciting way. And for me as a geneticist, the fact that our genetic efforts is now not just about diagnosis, but about therapy in more and more situations, and particularly the opportunity maybe, if we do everything right in the next decade, to figure out how to do effective and safe in vivo gene editing if you have the right way to distribute your editing apparatus to the right cells. Why could we not go after those thousands of genetic diseases where we know the specific DNA misspelling and we don't at the present time have anything to offer? That almost sounds scalable. If we can do that for a few diseases, why not do it for a lot more? So all of those things make me feel pretty bullish about where we are, even as we're sitting here in the National Academy worrying about the things that are not going well, and there's plenty of those. Our diversity issue clearly has been emphasized, as well it should be, in the course of the whole day. I don't know that we quite heard about some of the experiments that are underway that actually sound sort of promising in that regard, and I would point to the BUILD initiative, the National Mentoring Research Network, the first program of doing cohort recruitment of underrepresented scientists, which seems to be a way to do not only good recruitment, but retention. Those things haven't maybe gotten quite as much attention as experiments, because that's how we're going to get past wringing our hands into something better. Similarly, as far as how we do the funding to capture all of the talent that's out there, I don't think we've heard today just a number of lessons that we might have gleaned from COVID, beyond the amazing lesson of a vaccine, 2 of them getting approved in 11 months, but also the way in which we pulled sectors together, the therapeutic part of that, the active public-private partnership. 20 companies, the FDA, the NIH, and multiple philanthropies all working together to ultimately test 29 compounds in rigorous controlled trials to see if they actually provided benefit. Most of them didn't, but you needed to know that too, and 6 of them did. And that was unprecedented. And then finally, there's ARPA-H, which got touched on briefly by Keith Yamamoto. And I think this audience should be excited to watch this as a new model. This is taking the DARPA approach of how do you take really big risks on projects which, if they succeed, are going to have really big benefits. And you bring in program managers who have fire in the belly. You give them 3 years to do something dramatic. And yes, Keith, you fund companies to do this too, because many times the partners you need for those projects are going to be small businesses. Put that together and see what you can achieve with rigorous milestones and a willingness to pull the plug on the projects that aren't working. And you expect at least half of them will be of that sort. We haven't quite had that opportunity before, and everybody should be excited about figuring out how to use it. And now with Renee Wegerson having been appointed just 2 weeks ago as the new director with all of her DARPA experience, this is going to be fun to watch. Okay, enough from me.
You have just got them all excited. It's great, but I'll ask you some tough questions later. Cori Bargmann, an outstanding researcher, professor at the Rockefeller University, and being the first head of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So, Cori, you have an inside look at science philanthropy. Tell us a little bit about your experience, and I'll have some other questions for you, but give you 5 minutes.
So after Francis's victory lap here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the philanthropy ecosystem can supplement and kind of add to the federal system. So when I was a starting assistant professor at UCSF, Bruce Albert said to me, with new resources, you can do new things. And I think that's the key to philanthropy, is that you're allowed to try to do new things. You're allowed to, like a startup or like a venture capital, sort of try a bunch of things and see which ones work out. And you can try and ask where the holes are in the existing systems and work on those. And so to give an example that I think we are partway through now and we will continue to be through, I think 5, 6, 7 years ago, we didn't really know how to use tech and technology in the non-commercial sector, in science and in medicine, even though it was already clear that it was having a tremendous effect in the commercial sector. And how do we go about using that? The tools on that side were not that useful. There were a lot of people trying to do everything in their own domain, not successfully. And so it did require the convergence approach of bringing together people from tech, people from experimental science, people from medicine who knew what the questions are, people who could address the issues together. And that was something that you could try out several things in a philanthropic setting and see which ones felt like they were going to have the most value. And the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative did this, but other philanthropies have worked in that area as well. Historically, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Sloan Foundation worked on areas in data science, trying to figure out how to build those up. And more recently, groups like the Schmidt Foundation. So, how do you get these people together? A lot of this comes to the point that Jay Shanduri mentioned about sort of the long elbow of developing technologies. How do you get people how do you go from the initial invention, which we're really good at supporting in basic science, to the commercialization, which also there are good mechanisms to, but where there's a lot of work to be done in the middle. So you have to kind of go through cycles, and the one that's close to my heart is single-cell biology, because to me that is the tool that needed to exist between genetic risk factors, which we've gotten so much of from Genome Project, and human beings and what cells and tissues are affected. We needed the parts list of the human body. We needed to know what the cells were and what genes were active in each cell, how genetic risk affected them. Well, the experimental technology was immature and needed to start over. You needed doctors to tell you how to go about finding the right tissues in the right conditions. And you actually, turns out, needed a whole different kind of sort of statistical and analytical tools distinct from the things that were existing at the time. And so all of those groups sort of had a chance to work together, and sort of building that up with some wrong starts and bringing different people in was something that felt like a good job for a philanthropy to do. It's now something that seems pretty robust. I think its promise is not done yet. But even then, you can still see where there's going to be a need for a philanthropic or a public input. So How is all this data going to get integrated and harmonized and served up so that everyone can use it? That's not something a company is going to do for you. That's something that we still have to build out. And I think these are all areas where sort of building new tools out is kind of something that philanthropy can help to do and can enjoy doing. And I would say another example of a tool that I think of as in some ways as a philanthropic tool is AlphaFold. You know, Google developed that for its own purposes, ultimately hoping to make money in medicine, but they donated it back to the scientific community, recognizing that it was built on the back of the protein structural database. And now it is essentially a resource for all of us to use. And even though I'm not sure they would call that a philanthropic act, I think it really was. And the last thing I want to say about philanthropy is that I think we're entering a period of experimentation around what kinds of scientific institutions we have. So we've had kind of a monoculture in academia of a particular kind of model with a training lab and a lab head and trainees. And we're starting to experiment with different institutions that maybe go away from a pure training model into more of a scientist model. And I think that addresses some of the things people were talking about with postdocs and livable wages and retirement benefits. So if you look at some of the institutions that are strongly supported by philanthropy now, like the Broad Institute and the Allen Institute and Janelia, Howard Hughes's campus, and a bunch of new institutes that are spinning up in California now, they are built much more around the idea of working together on big projects for 10 or 15 years, and then having something that comes out of that that can then be shared with the community. And I think particularly the ones that have, like the Allen Institute, generated resources that are broadly used with the community are having a really big impact and are seeing added value, not just as one more place with internal funding, but as a place that's delivering something unique to the scientific community that's helping to build it out. It's like it's the current incarnation of what Bell Labs was in a different way with a different form of funding, but with that idea of long-term, different model, shared resources. And I'll stop there.
So far, really uplifting messages. Do you buy it? It's very exciting, truly. Both great stuff. Alondra Nelson, the Deputy Director of OSTP and the former Acting Director of OSTP. Now, Alondra is so well known for her work, particularly in the social science area. But I think people want to hear both your point of view about OSTP, right? What does it do? How does it drive policy changes? And how would we actually, as Keith said, bring together all the different agencies to work, but also your perspective on the issue of diversity, equity, et cetera.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Victor, with this august company and with my running partner of the last 7.5 months, Francis Collins. It was, talk about a great experiment. We just had a thrill working together on behalf of the nation and the president to sort of lead and organize science and technology policy. It was a real pleasure. So I think it's okay to be cautiously optimistic. I think those of us who are researchers, we try things, we fail, we try again, our hypothesis is wrong, a hunch is wrong, and we go back. And so I think that disposition, I feel very comfortable in the space of the cautious optimism that keeps us going in our work, and this is what my researcher hat on, but also allows us to be critical of the work and where we need to go. So I want to just give folks an overview of the last 18 months because it's been quite breathtaking, certainly from inside the White House, particularly around areas of science and technology policy that has everything to do with healthier futures and with medicine. I want to take us back to January 2021. President Biden, Vice President Harris issue an executive order on equity that says that equity is going to be the sort of lens and driver of all of the policy of this administration. In that same week, 2 days later, there was an executive order on scientific integrity. So several of the first utterances of the Biden-Harris administration are about the importance of equity and about the importance of science, evidence-based policymaking, and scientific integrity and the work that we were beginning to do as an administration. And I think that is quite profound, and that was really us on the starting block. You know, when the gun went off, those were the kind of foundations that we move forward with. More recently, as many as you know, there's been historic legislation and issues around the science and technology enterprise. So there's been legislation like the PACT Act, which is making expanding healthcare possibilities for veterans. There's, of course, been the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a lot of investments for energy innovation and energy technology, but I want this community to know in particular is also very importantly reducing healthcare costs and investing in R&D that has bearing on making us all healthier. And of course, there is the CHIPS and Science Act, which is in part moving forward with semiconductor R&D and innovation, but it also is, particularly the Section B of that law, the End Science part, is a vision statement about what a science and technology ecosystem should look like and be. And it says that we should be investing not only on the coast, but in R&D, education, human capacity throughout the country, that we should pay particular attention to tribal colleges and universities, that we should be thinking about what are called emerging institutions, HBCUs, and the like. So it is a strategy for the future of S&T in our country that is really expansive. I heard a bit of the last panel. There's a piece of CHIPS and Science that's also about engaging non-expert communities in the work of science. Dr. Yamamoto talked about this a little bit in the last panel. And that's really, how do we show our work? How do we get the larger American community to trust science, to trust government, and to be engaged in that work, and to understand that I think those of us, particularly who are teachers in this room, that the work of discovery is for all of us, and that there's a particular CZI or UCSF or Stanford or Michigan pursuit, but there's also a way in which if we want to truly engage an American public and a community and a global society that is increasingly driven by science and technology, in which we need to take them as partners in that work and understand that there is a level at which they can be partners in that work. So the great thing about being at OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, is that we get to help coordinate and drive and galvanize the nation, sectors, and also the U.S. government around that work. And you should know from the perspective of government that people are tremendously excited to have this opportunity, of course, to have the funding, some of which has yet to be appropriated, to be able to do this work and move forward this transformative vision to make it into action. Clearly, a huge part of this is going to be the equity piece, and the piece of it that is really about, as we say at OSTP, driving equity to change and transform the S&T community, but also taking equity as a kind of one of the missions. So we think about our big challenges, climate change, the pandemic. I think equity is also a challenge to which S&T approaches, can be put to as well. So it's both equity for S&T, equity in S&T is a way to think about it. This legislation, much of it really leans in, puts the thumb on the scale about having a more equitable S&T enterprise and what that can and should mean. And then I would say also at OSTP, as many of you know, we've been working, the portfolio typically includes making investments and providing leadership around the STEM ecosystem. And certainly we are working on issues of STEM equity, everything from graduate training and fellowships, talking with colleagues at NSF and NIH about that, but also working in the community science and citizen science space and thinking about issues of access to science and the sort of products of S&T that are federally funded.
Thank you. Alondra and Francis, I need to thank you on behalf of the Academy for the great public service you guys have done. Amen. Yeah. All right, Holden. Someone said, is our academic publication system broken? Are you on the hot seat? So tell us about your experience now as the editor-in-chief of Science, and the future of the publication.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here in an environment where people are so upbeat about scientific publishing. Yeah, I'm so excited. No, look, I'm actually optimistic that we can work this out. But the most important thing to do that is for everybody in this room who hasn't read Alondra's memo and who hasn't read the editorial by my boss, Sudip Parikh, and our publisher, Bill Moran, and the great Shirley Malcolm, if you haven't read those, you need to go read them right away because this whole thing has a lot of very important implications for a lot of the things about the welfare of the scientific community that was discussed in the last panel. So the first part is about open access. And what has happened in open access in the last 10 years is a lot of things with a lot of unintended consequences have been implemented while most of us were paying attention to other things. And the most important of those is creating an ecosystem of open access journals that are funded with APCs, article processing charges, which is a great scheme for Elsevier and Springer to get money from indirect costs through the libraries and money from direct costs from the APCs, which is nice work if you can get it. And you don't see them complaining about this open access thing because they're laughing all the way to the bank. And Richard Horton had a great piece in The Lancet about it. I have no idea what the corporate overlords at Elsevier, who are his employers, thought of his piece, but I would also encourage you to read that. The second piece of it is the open data. So, the word open sounds good. It always sounds great, all right? So now you've got this open access. And there's one other thing about open access that you need to inform yourself about, which is when you get a CC BY license, if you know what that is, it's something you click I agree when you publish an open access paper. You ought to go read that license because one of the things it says in there is that anybody who wants to can take your paper and change it and resell it. Now, we tried to get, instead of CCBY, something called CCBY NCND, which would stop people from doing that. But during this period of unintended consequences when, there were the open access advocates, let's call them, were driving all of this, they didn't want that limitation. But that's a profound thing, too. Then you have the open data. Now, of course, we all want all the data to be posted somewhere so that everybody can redo the analysis and redo the experiments and compare their data to the data that's posted. That's a really good thing. But who's going to control those data? Who's going to pay to maintain them? Who's going to make sure that they actually match what's in the paper? And once, again, if the commercial publishers can get the papers that they can change and resell and get the data, which they can do anything they want to, then you've basically taken science and made it into Facebook, all right? I would just, and I think, our experience when the Holden memo came along, when I was a chancellor, which we rolled out and it worked and it was all, it all came out fine. But when we started rolling out, the investigators had no idea what we were talking about, right? So the most important thing that everybody can do, and I believe if they do this that we can succeed, is to go understand all of this as well as you can. Because people in this room, most of you may not like paying the APCs, but most of you have labs that are capitalized in a way where you can pay them. You can get your papers into outstanding journals, but there are lots of people who don't have those advantages who are going to be affected by that. And we owe it to all of them to make sure that we are doing the best we can. Science has a solution to this that we hope is going to work. It's detailed in Sudip's editorial, which I encourage you all to read. We're kind of taking a leap of faith that the community is going to go with us on this. But I think if we all actually think about what's going on, then we can come up with a way to do this that will address a lot of the challenges that have been raised. It won't happen overnight, but there are good places that we can go with all this.
I'd like to come back to some of these issues later, but let me go to Marc Tessier-Lavigne. Marc, I know you've got your board of trustees meeting, so thank you for being able to join us. Marc, as you know, is the president of Stanford University, one of the leading research universities. So Marc, really in many ways, the future rests in the universities, and all these things are converging on what are you educating, what's your pipeline, how to do research. and the question about organization of research in the future. So say a few words about what your thoughts are.
Great. Well, thank you, Victor, and thank you so much for the opportunity to participate. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I just want to start by echoing the, some of the enthusiasm and guarded optimism we heard from other panelists. I really think that the life sciences are poised to really redefine human health in the 21st century in the same way that innovations in physics define the 20th century. And universities have an important role and responsibility to help usher that in collaboration with all the others who are there on the panel today. At the most fundamental level, obviously, our role is several-fold. First, to support individual brilliant researchers do their best work, and I think universities have a special responsibility to enable research that's just fueled by sheer curiosity that, as we know, can reveal profound insights and lead us in exciting directions and often are the sources in unpredictable way of the most transformative advances. I think we have a special obligation. It is more difficult for the private sector, for example, to undertake that kind of work. At the same time, I do think we have an obligation to apply knowledge to tackle urgent problems. People often want to pit, basic research against application. I like to talk about the power of and. Research universities like Stanford and so many of our peers across the country have to support fundamental research, but also the intentional application of research to tackle great problems in the case of this panel of medicine, of course, and they work hand in glove. Fundamental knowledge is the essential underpinning of any attempted application, but the process of translating knowledge, we know, will open up new questions and new areas of discovery. It's really a virtuous cycle between the two. And our third important role is, of course, to train the future leaders in biomedicine. And here I just want to underscore a theme that we've heard throughout the day and also on this panel already, that expanding access to create opportunities for students from all backgrounds and especially underrepresented backgrounds is a really urgent priority for all of us and especially for us in universities. We also believe that it's important when we train future leaders in biomedicine to ensure that students engage meaningfully with ethics and civic responsibility during their university years, which we're trying to tackle through curricular changes at the university as well. I'd like to make just two sets of comments about the structural organization of universities, because I think what I've said up till now is not very controversial, but I think it's all a question of how do you pull all of this together in an intentional way. And the way that we've thought about it at Stanford, and I think reflects what's being done at many universities, is really to have a three-pronged approach. The first is we need to continue to have departmental structures where scientists can go deep within individual disciplines. But then we need to supplement that with mechanisms to break down the silos to create the interdisciplinary environment that's been emphasized today, which we do systematically through interdisciplinary institutes. So in the case of medicine, we have departments from biochemistry through to chemical biology and everything in between. But we also have interdisciplinary institutes that bring together different disciplines within medicine and the biosciences, but also beyond that. One of the ones I'll just mention here is our ChemH Institute, which stands for Chemistry, Engineering, and Medicine for Human Health. It brings together our chemists with our engineers, with our biomedical scientists. It's directed by Carolyn Bertozzi, who we were thrilled to celebrate 2 weeks ago when she received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. That's one of many institutes we have to break down barriers within the life sciences and beyond to bring people together from different disciplines. So disciplines, disciplinary departments, I think of them as verticals, interdisciplinary institutes, horizontals. And then the third part that we think is very important, what we call accelerators, others will have different names, that are infrastructure, resources, expert assistance to enable our researchers to take their ideas and to go more seamlessly from idea to impact. We know, of course, in biomedicine about the valley of death and going from a theory in the lab to an FDA-approved medicine. And we believe that universities can help move us more seamlessly along that continuum, especially in the early stages and going from an idea for how to make a drug that could tackle a particular poorly treated disease, to making a drug prototype. And we provide our faculty with the infrastructure on a competitive basis to be able to go from idea to drug prototype and to test their idea. We think it's important for universities to have that kind of mechanism because so often great ideas just lie fallow and they don't get picked up. There are lots of great ideas, and it's very hard for people on the outside to know which ones to go after. I saw this. I worked in the private sector for a number of years myself in biotech. There were just so many ideas coming at us. It was often difficult to know just based on the idea. Having a drug prototype really accelerates the conversation. So we think this three-part structure of departments, interdisciplinary institutes, and accelerators is, for us, how we're organizing ourselves to be intentional. We're applying that in medicine, as I've described. I might add, we've just created a new school, the first new school at Stanford in 70 years, focused on sustainability. And within that new school, we have disciplinary departments that span the natural sciences, engineering, and the social sciences and humanities. On the one hand, we have interdisciplinary institutes focused on energy, environment, and sustainable societies, and we have an accelerator. So I really believe those three parts are essential if we're going to be able to go further, faster in generating new knowledge and then applying it for the benefit of humanity. One last point here. I've talked about the university as a self-contained unit. Of course, we're not. Our connections with other parts of the ecosystem are so important. We've heard the role of government, of philanthropy, the private sector today. And it's very important for universities also to be structured to enable that deep connectivity to occur. We applaud, for example, the creation of ARPA-H, and we're really excited about being able to engage in the kind of large-scale, very audacious team science that will be enabled by that. We have to facilitate that for our scholars. Cori Bargmann mentioned a number of philanthropic models, and there it's so important for universities to be very open to new ways of doing things. We think back, 40 years ago when HHMI was being established. I think it was a very different model. It took people a while to accommodate, and we see the power of that model. Today, we see other institutes coming up, and the people who start those institutes are doing experiments. They want to do things slightly differently. I think often in academia, we say, well, if you don't do it exactly this way, then we can't proceed. I think we have to have the opposite attitude. Let's work with you to figure out how we can work together and seamlessly integrate, while respecting the needs of your institute and the needs of the university as well. So being intentional about those different dimensions within the university and intentional about engaging the external world, I think is going to be necessary if we want to realize the full potential of the biomedical revolution that is ahead of us.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, you know that, Marc, you are at Stanford, and everybody recognizes that Stanford is talent-rich and resource-rich, sitting in a very unique space. I think the other university presidents may have somewhat different perspective.